In the vast, unforgiving land of the West, a man's worth is not measured by the color of his skin, but by the courage in his heart and the truth on his tongue. The sun was a merciless hammer over the plains, beating down on the man mending a fence line. Ethan worked with a steady, practiced rhythm, his movements economical and precise. He did not waste energy, not under this heat. The worn leather of his vest clung to his back, and the dust of the corral settled into the creases of his denim trousers. He had been at the Triple J Ranch for nearly a year, since the treaty was signed. Jonathan, the owner, was a hard man who valued hard work above all else. He did not offer smiles freely, but his pay was honest, and his word was solid. For Ethan, who walked between two worlds, that was enough. He was a man of the Arapaho, but here he was just a ranch hand, proving his worth with his hands. From the porch of the main house, Olivia watched him. She held a basket of laundry, but her hands were still. She had seen how the other hands worked. They moved with a brash, hurried energy. Ethan was different. He was quiet, his presence as natural as the cottonwood trees along the creek. He moved with a grace that spoke of a life lived in tune with the land, a life she could only imagine. Her father said he was a good worker, the best he had, but Olivia saw more than that. She saw a deep well of stillness in his dark eyes, a history that was both proud and sorrowful, and in those quiet moments she felt a strange pull, a silent conversation passing between them across the dusty yard. That evening, Deputy Samuel rode in, his silver star gleaming on his chest. He dismounted with an air of ownership, his spurs jingling on the porch steps. He was there to see Olivia, as he often was. They had been promised to each other since they were young, an arrangement made between their fathers. But something had changed. The easy familiarity they once shared was now a strained silence. "Evening, Olivia," Samuel said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet air. "Saw your father's man out there. Seems strange, having one of them working so close to the house." His gaze was sharp, a clear challenge directed at the unspoken tension between them. Olivia clutched her basket tighter. "Ethan is a hard worker, Samuel. He earns his place here every day." Her defense was quiet but firm. Samuel scoffed, a humorless sound. "A leopard does not change its spots, Olivia. My father says you cannot trust them. They are heathens at heart." He tried to take her arm, a gesture of possession that made her flinch. She stepped back, her blue eyes turning cool. "My father trusts him. That is all that matters." The space between them felt wider than the entire territory. Samuel's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking toward the corral where Ethan was now leading the horses to water, oblivious to the storm brewing on the porch. A few days later, a sudden thunderstorm rolled across the plains, turning the dry creek bed into a rushing torrent. Olivia had been gathering wildflowers on the far side when the storm broke. As she tried to hurry back, her mare, startled by a crack of lightning, reared and threw her to the ground. Her ankle twisted beneath her, a sharp bolt of pain shooting up her leg. The horse, wild with fear, galloped away towards the ranch, leaving her stranded as the rain began to fall in heavy, cold sheets. She tried to stand, but the pain was too great. Helpless and alone, she watched the gray sky weep, her simple calico dress quickly becoming soaked through. It was Ethan who saw the riderless mare arrive at the stables, its eyes wide with fright. Without a word to anyone, he grabbed a lead rope and set out, his tracking skills a part of him that ranch work could never erase. He followed the faint trail, his gaze scanning the ground even as the rain worked to wash it away. He found her huddled beneath a rocky outcrop, her face pale, her dress muddied. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. "Miss Olivia," he said, his voice calm and even. "Are you harmed?" She looked up, relief washing over her face, and, for the first time, she allowed herself to see the deep concern in his eyes. "My ankle," she managed, her teeth chattering from the cold. "I cannot walk on it." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. With a gentleness that surprised her, he examined the injury. "It is not broken, I think, but you cannot stay here." Without hesitation, he carefully lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected. She made a small sound of protest, but there was no strength in it. As he carried her back towards the ranch, her head rested against his shoulder. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, and the warmth of his body through his damp shirt. The storm raged around them, but in that small space there was only a profound and unexpected quiet. When they reached the house, Jonathan and Samuel were on the porch, their faces etched with worry. Samuel's expression curdled into a mask of fury when he saw Olivia in Ethan's arms. He rushed forward. "Get your hands off her, you savage!" he snarled. But Jonathan put a firm hand on the deputy's chest, stopping him. He looked from his daughter's pale face to Ethan's stoic expression. "What happened?" Jonathan demanded. Olivia answered before Ethan could speak. "He saved me, Papa. I fell. He found me, and he carried me home." Her gaze met Ethan's for a fleeting moment, a silent message of gratitude that Samuel did not miss. The battle lines were being drawn. In the days that followed, Olivia was confined to a chair on the porch, her ankle wrapped and elevated. The incident had changed something between her and Ethan. Their conversations were still brief, limited to polite inquiries about her health. But the looks they exchanged were longer, deeper. He would bring her a cup of cool water from the well without being asked. He once carved a small, smooth bird out of a piece of cottonwood and left it on the railing for her. These small gestures were a language all their own, a quiet courtship unfolding under the watchful, disapproving eyes of Samuel and the cautious gaze of her father. The simple wooden bird felt more precious than any gift she had ever received. Samuel's visits became more frequent and more unbearable. He would sit beside her, talking of their future, of the house he planned to build, as if her feelings were irrelevant. "Soon you will be Mrs. Samuel Davies," he said one afternoon, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We will have the biggest ranch in the county, bigger than your father's." He saw only land and legacy. He did not see her. Olivia looked past him, her eyes finding Ethan as he broke a wild colt in the round pen. She saw strength, patience, and a quiet spirit. She saw a man, not an acquisition. "Perhaps that is your plan, Samuel," she replied softly. "It is not mine." The quiet rejection sent a tremor of rage through Samuel. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden porch. "What is that supposed to mean? It is our arrangement." His voice was low, menacing. "Or has that heathen filled your head with nonsense?" Olivia met his glare without flinching. "My head is quite clear. I will not be a part of an arrangement that feels like a cage." The finality in her tone struck him silent. He stared at her, then his eyes narrowed, shifting to the corral. He saw the way she looked at Ethan, the way a woman looks at a man she admires. Jealousy, cold and sharp, twisted in his gut. It was a poison that demanded an outlet. That night, Samuel met two men of ill repute, the Calloway brothers, in the back room of the saloon. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. "I have a job for you," Samuel said, tossing a heavy coin pouch on the table. "I want some cattle moved, off the Triple J ranch." One of the brothers, a hulking man with a scarred face, raised an eyebrow. "Rustling from Jonathan? He is a tough man. And you are the law." Samuel leaned forward, his face a grim mask in the lamplight. "The law is what I say it is. We are not just taking cattle. We are going to leave a message. A message that says some people do not belong here." The first raid was small. A dozen head of cattle vanished from a remote pasture overnight. The ranch hands found the tracks in the morning dew. They were messy, trampled, but a few clear prints from unshod ponies were found. The foreman, a man named Elias, pointed them out to Jonathan. "Looks like a small party from the reservation, boss," getting bold. Jonathan's face was grim as he stared at the evidence. His gaze drifted towards the stables, where Ethan was preparing the horses for the day. A seed of doubt, planted long ago by the town's prejudice and now watered by Samuel, began to sprout in his mind. He said nothing, but a new watchfulness entered his eyes. Samuel rode out to the ranch to investigate, his expression a perfect blend of concern and authority. He walked the ground, nodding sagely. "Just as I feared, Jonathan. The treaty is not worth the paper it is written on. They will take what they want." He glanced pointedly at Ethan, who was standing quietly nearby, observing the scene. "You have one of them right here. How can you know he is not sending signals to his brothers, telling them which pastures are unguarded?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and ugly. Ethan's face remained impassive, but his hands tightened into fists at his sides. He would not give the deputy the satisfaction of a reaction. Olivia overheard the exchange from the porch. The injustice of it made her blood boil. She knew Ethan. She knew the quiet honor that guided him. Later, when she saw him by the creek, skipping stones across the water, she approached him. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. "You know it is not true, what he says," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan did not look at her. He sent another stone skipping, 5 times before it sank. What a man like him says can become true if enough people believe it. There was a deep weariness in his voice, the sound of a man who had fought this same battle many times before. "I do not believe it," Olivia insisted, stepping closer. "And my father, he is a fair man. He will see the truth." Ethan finally turned to look at her, and the sadness in his eyes struck her to the core. "Your world has one truth, Miss Olivia. Mine has another. They do not often meet in peace." For a moment he let his guard down, and she saw the man beneath the stoic exterior, a man burdened by the hatred of others. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that her belief in him was a light in a gathering darkness, but the gulf between them seemed too wide to cross. He simply nodded and walked away, leaving her alone by the water. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time, nearly 30 head were taken from a northern grazing area. The loss was significant, a real blow to the ranch. Samuel and a posse of his men were on the scene before noon. This time, the evidence was much clearer. A series of distinct moccasin prints led away from the broken fence, and a single arrowhead of Arapaho design was found snagged on a bush nearby. The other ranch hands murmured amongst themselves, their suspicion of Ethan now hardening into open hostility. He was told to stay in the bunkhouse, a prisoner on the very land he worked to protect. The isolation was a heavy weight on his soul. Samuel presented the arrowhead to Jonathan with a grim flourish. "The proof is undeniable," he declared. "This is their work. They are testing you, seeing how much they can take before you fight back." He let his words sink in before continuing. "And the one you harbor here, he is the fox in your henhouse. He is their eyes and ears." Jonathan took the arrowhead, turning it over in his calloused fingers. He had seen thousands like it. It was too clean, too perfectly placed. A flicker of doubt warred with the mounting pressure from his men and the community. The weight of his decision felt immense. The entire valley was watching. Confined to the porch, Olivia felt a growing sense of dread. She did not believe it. None of it. It was too convenient, too perfect. She remembered riding through that northern pasture just last week. She knew its every rock and tree. The story Samuel was weaving did not feel right. It was like a poorly stitched quilt, the patterns all wrong. Driven by a desperate need for the truth, she saddled her own horse while the men were gathered with her father. She would go to the scene herself. She had to. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. She was no tracker, not like Ethan, but she knew her land. The land would not lie. Under the harsh afternoon sun, Olivia found the tracks. At first, they looked convincing. But as she knelt for a closer look, she noticed things a posse of angry men would overlook. The moccasin prints were all made by the same person, stepping heavily, pressing the pattern deep into the soil as if to ensure it was seen. A true raiding party would have many men, their tracks lighter, more varied. And the path they took was not clever. It avoided rocky ground where tracks would be hidden, instead staying on soft earth. It was a trail designed to be found. A cold certainty settled over her. This was not a raid. It was a performance. It was a lie. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she rode back to the ranch, the pieces clicking into place. The single moccasin pattern, the obvious trail, the perfectly placed arrowhead. It was all a setup, a cruel deception designed to frame one man. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, who was behind it. It had Samuel's brand of arrogant cruelty all over it. As she neared the house, she saw Ethan standing by the corral, guarded by 2 of the ranch hands. The look of profound loneliness on his face tore at her. He was being condemned by lies, and she was the only one who held the truth. The weight of that knowledge was terrifying. She stormed into her father's study, her riding skirt still dusty from the trail. Jonathan and Samuel were there, hunched over a map. "It is a lie," she said, her voice shaking with emotion but her gaze steady. Both men looked up, startled. "Papa, the tracks are fake. They are deliberate, made to be found. It was not a raiding party." Samuel let out a short, condescending laugh. "Olivia, you are letting your feelings cloud your judgment. Tracking is men's work. You do not know what you saw." His dismissal only fueled her resolve. She turned to her father, her eyes pleading. "You taught me this land, Papa. You taught me to see. Tell me," Jonathan said, his voice a low rumble. He ignored Samuel's protest and gave Olivia his full attention. She described everything in meticulous detail. The uniform depth of the footprints, the illogical path that seemed to invite discovery, the way a real tracker would have moved differently. "Someone is trying to start a war, Papa, and they are using Ethan to do it." As she spoke, Jonathan's expression shifted from skepticism to grim understanding. He looked at the arrowhead on his desk, then at Samuel, whose face had become a tight mask of indignation. For the first time, Jonathan saw the flicker of deceit in the deputy's eyes. "That is the most absurd story I have ever heard," Samuel blustered, trying to regain control. "She is hysterical, defending a savage because of some foolish infatuation." But his words had lost their power. Jonathan stood up, his towering presence filling the room. He looked at his daughter, not as a child, but as a woman of courage and conviction. He saw the truth in her eyes, and it shamed him for his own doubt. "That is enough, Samuel," he said, his voice like stone. He turned to Olivia. "What do you propose we do?" The question was a transfer of trust, a father finally seeing the strength he himself had fostered in his daughter. A new plan began to form, born in the quiet tension of the study. "We set a trap," Olivia said, her voice gaining confidence. "If they have done it twice, they will do it again. They are arrogant. They think we are all fools." Jonathan nodded slowly, his mind working through the logistics. "We will need to be careful. If Samuel is behind this, he has the law on his side." The risk was enormous. They would be accusing a deputy sheriff. If they were wrong, or if they failed, the consequences would be dire for all of them, but especially for Ethan. It was a gamble, with lives and futures hanging in the balance, but inaction was no longer an option. Jonathan sent for Ethan. The two ranch hands brought him to the study, their expressions a mixture of confusion and suspicion. When they were alone, Jonathan looked at the Arapaho warrior. "My daughter believes you are innocent," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "She says the tracks were a deception." Ethan's gaze shifted to Olivia, a flicker of surprise and something deeper in his eyes. He had expected condemnation, not this. He had prepared himself for a fight or a rope. He had not prepared himself for faith. "She speaks the truth," Ethan said simply. There was no desperation in his voice, only a quiet statement of fact. "I am choosing to believe her," Jonathan continued, his eyes boring into Ethan's. "Which means I am putting the fate of my ranch and my family in your hands. We are going to set a trap. I need your knowledge. I need your eyes." It was a profound concession, an admission of respect from a man who gave it to very few. For the first time since coming to the Triple J, Ethan felt like more than a hired hand. He was being seen as an ally, a warrior whose skills were valued. He gave a single, sharp nod. "I will help." The alliance was forged, not by treaty or by law, but by a daughter's courage and a father's difficult choice to trust. That evening, under the cloak of darkness, the three of them planned. Ethan, Olivia, and Jonathan. They spread a map on the table, their faces illuminated by a single lantern. Ethan's finger traced a path to a small box canyon. "Here," he said. "It is easy to drive cattle into, but hard to get them out of quickly. A perfect place for an ambush." He explained how the rustlers would approach, the lookouts they would post. Olivia listened, adding her own knowledge of the terrain. Jonathan absorbed it all, his mind formulating the practical details. The three of them, a rancher, his daughter, and an Arapaho warrior, were united against a common enemy. The next day, Jonathan and a few hands he trusted implicitly, including the foreman Elias, moved a small herd of prize cattle into the pasture leading to the box canyon. They made a show of it, ensuring the news would travel to town. The bait was set. That night, a palpable tension settled over the ranch. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call of a coyote seemed to carry a threat. Ethan, Olivia, and Jonathan, along with Elias, rode out under a sliver of moon, their faces grim. They carried rifles, their presence a silent promise of the confrontation to come. Olivia's heart beat a frantic rhythm, a mixture of fear for their safety and a fierce desire for justice. They positioned themselves on the ridge overlooking the canyon entrance. Ethan chose the spot, a cluster of rocks that offered a clear view while keeping them concealed in deep shadow. They settled in for the long wait. The hours crawled by. The night air grew cold. Jonathan sat like a statue, his rifle across his knees. Olivia, huddled between her father and Ethan, found a strange comfort in their silent strength. She looked at Ethan, a silhouette against the star-dusted sky. He was completely still, his focus absolute, a part of the night itself. In that moment of shared danger, the walls between them seemed to crumble completely. Ethan placed a hand on her arm, a light touch, and she looked where he was pointing. In the distance, 3 riders were moving slowly, dark shapes against the pale land. They were not driving cattle, they were scouting. The Calloway brothers, no doubt. They surveyed the herd from a distance before melting back into the darkness. "They will be back," Ethan whispered, his voice so low it was almost a thought. "With the deputy. He will want to be here to see it himself." The cold certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. The trap was about to be sprung. The waiting was the hardest part, a slow tightening of a knot in her stomach. Another hour passed. Then, they heard it. The low sound of cattle being moved, the soft thud of hooves on dirt. 5 riders emerged from the east, pushing the herd towards the canyon. At their lead, unmistakable even in the gloom, was Deputy Samuel Davies. A bitter taste filled Olivia's mouth. Seeing him there, his star of office, a mockery of everything it was supposed to represent, confirmed the depth of his betrayal. Jonathan raised a hand, a silent signal to his men, hidden on the opposite ridge. They were all in position. The air grew thick with anticipation. The moment of truth had arrived. "Now," Jonathan said, his voice cutting through the night. A single shot rang out from his rifle, aimed at the sky. It was the signal. Suddenly the canyon was alive with light as lanterns were uncovered on both ridges, catching the rustlers in a crossfire of illumination. "You are surrounded, Davies!" Jonathan's voice boomed across the canyon. "Drop your firearms!" Samuel and his men reined in their horses, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. For a moment, they were frozen in disbelief, trapped animals caught in the glare. The Calloway brothers instinctively reached for their firearms, their outlaw instincts taking over. One of the brothers fired a wild shot towards the ridge. It was a fatal mistake. A volley of rifle fire answered from the hidden positions. The brother cried out and fell from his saddle. The other, seeing his sibling fall, spurred his horse in a desperate attempt to flee, firing blindly into the darkness. Elias, the foreman, took careful aim and fired. The second brother slumped forward, his escape cut short. It was all over in seconds. The air was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the sudden, deafening silence that follows violence. Samuel and his 2 remaining men sat on their horses, their hands slowly rising in the air. Ethan and Jonathan moved down the ridge, their rifles still trained on the survivors. Olivia remained behind, her hands trembling as she held the lantern. She had known there would be a confrontation, but the reality of it, the swiftness of the violence, was shocking. She watched as Ethan approached Samuel, his movements fluid and sure. There was no triumph in his expression, only a quiet, resolute solemnity. He took the deputy's revolver from his holster without a word. The transfer of power was absolute. The man of the law was disarmed by the man he had tried to destroy. The irony was as sharp as a blade. Samuel stared at Ethan, his face contorted with pure hatred. You will never have her," he spat, his voice venomous. "She is one of us. You are just a savage." Ethan did not react to the insult. He simply looked at the man before him, a man so consumed by prejudice that he had thrown away his honor, his future, and the lives of his men. "Your words are empty," Ethan replied, his voice calm. "Like your heart." Jonathan stepped forward, his face like thunder. "You have betrayed your office, Samuel. You have betrayed my trust. You will answer to the sheriff for this." The reign of the deputy was over. The ride back to town was tense and silent. Samuel and his surviving man were tied and led, their heads bowed in disgrace. When they arrived, Jonathan went straight to the sheriff's office and told him the entire story, supported by Elias and his other men. The sheriff, a weary but honest man, listened grimly. Faced with the testimony of a respected rancher and his own captured deputy, he had no choice. Samuel was stripped of his star and locked in a cell. The news of his betrayal spread through the town like a prairie fire, silencing the whispers against Ethan and the Arapaho people. Truth, it seemed, could be as powerful as any weapon. Back at the ranch, a strange peace settled. The cloud of suspicion that had hung over Ethan was gone, replaced by a grudging respect from the other hands. But the true change was in Jonathan. He watched as Olivia brought a basin of water and clean bandages to Ethan, who had a long scratch on his arm from a ricochet. He saw the way she gently tended to the wound, and the way Ethan looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, quiet emotion that needed no words. He saw two people who had faced danger together, whose bond had been forged in a crucible of lies and prejudice. He saw that their love was real and strong. That evening, Jonathan found Ethan by the corral, looking out at the sunset, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You have proven your honor," the rancher said, standing beside him. "You saved my cattle, and you saved my daughter's faith in what is right." Ethan inclined his head slightly. "I did what any man would do." Jonathan shook his head. "No, not any man." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was wrong to doubt you. I let the poison of others cloud my judgment." He looked at Ethan directly. "A man is measured by his actions, not his blood. By that measure, you are the better man than he ever was." Jonathan cleared his throat, the next words coming with some difficulty, but with absolute sincerity. "I see how she looks at you, and I see how you look at her." He let out a long breath. "This world will not make it easy for you. There will be whispers and hard stares. There will be trouble." He looked from the sunset back to the two young people who had earned his respect. "But this ranch is your home if you will have it. And my daughter's happiness is the most important thing on this earth to me." He placed a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I give you my blessing." In the fading light, Ethan and Olivia looked at each other, their future uncertain but their path, at last, clear.